Today's topic is pruning solutions. I want to thank Paul Rees of OSU Urban Forestry Graduate Certificate Program and Bruce Nelson, Master Pruner, for their comments. 1 hour is a short time to cover this complex topic, so I have decided to focus on concepts I consider to be crucial. This session will give you an exposure. Watch the videos shown on the screen to master these concepts. Generally, there are three reasons for pruning, and they are beauty, health, and production. These concepts, these purposes relate very well to today's focus. Healthy structure for ornamental trees, production for fruit trees, and beauty for ornamental shrubs are the areas that I will focus this presentation. I want to also emphasize that good pruning begins with an understanding of a plant's natural form and growth habit. I think of pruning as a method to facilitate the best expression of a plant's beauty, health, and production. For ornamental trees, I will focus on these ideas: a strong structure, structural pruning, and discuss three common pruning cuts. In a tree, anywhere two branches come together is a potential stress point. We can determine the strength of a connection by assessing three things: the branch placement, the branch angle, and aspect ratio. For branch placement, check where the branches are connected to the trunk, and also check the vertical distance between branches. The ideal pattern is having branches surrounding 360 degrees around the trunk to maximize sunlight and have enough vertical distance between branches to minimize competition. Branch angle is the second thing we check. Between 45 and 60 degrees makes a strong connection. In a narrow crotch where the bark becomes compressed or included in the joint, it makes a weak connection. Aspect ratio is the third clue. It's the diameter of the branch divided by the diameter of the trunk. The photo on the right shows a strong connection between a large trunk and a small branch. The illustrations on the left shows more examples. Here we have a small, medium, and large aspect ratio, which gives us the strongest, less strong, and weakest connections. This example here, where we have adjoining trunks of equal size, is called codominant, and this is the weakest connection that you want to avoid in your trees. Here are some real-life examples. Let's rate each tree, beginning with A. How's the branch placement? Well, I see branches around the trunk, kind of a decent 360-degree coverage. I can see some vertical distance between the branches lower down in the tree. Further up, it's a little difficult to see. Branch angle, while lower down, these are reasonably good wide angles, but I see a problem here. See the very narrow angle that forms a V? And aspect ratio. Pretty good down below, smaller branches connected to the larger trunk, but here we have what seems to be a codominant situation. That's a problem. Now let's look at B. Branch placement, pretty good 360-degree coverage, but are there vertical distance between branch attachment? I don't see them. So that's not good. And as a result, we can see branch angle, very close, included bark here, and aspect ratio All these branches seem to be similar size and poor aspect ratio. Finally, let's look at C. Branch placement, good 360-degree coverage. How about the vertical distance? They're kind of close together, but not too bad. The angles are good down below. There may be some issues with angles higher up. And the aspect ratio, again, good. Small branches connected to the bigger trunk. Higher up, there may be problem here with the aspect ratio. Okay, so what do you do if you have structural problems? We do structural pruning. Structural pruning encourages a strong central leader and slows the growth of side branches. So let's look at this example and ask these three questions. Where's the leader? Where is the competition? And where to cut the competition? Let's begin low, moving up. This is our central leader. It's labeled C. The competitors are a side branch on the left and one on the right, label A and B. All right, how do we reduce the vigor of these side branches? Let's look at A first. Going up from the point of connection, there is a side shoot, which makes a potential cut point where I have the red pointer. By removing the upright portion, we slow the growth and subordinate the side branch to reduce the competition against the leader. Now, are there other opportunities where we can make a potential cut? Yeah, let's continue. Moving up. Okay, here's a upright branch. We can cut it off. Continue. Oh, here's another upright branch. Cut it off. So we can make two small cuts, subordinate the growth to this side shoot, or make one lower cut and subordinate the growth to this side shoot. Similar idea, let's look at B, moving up from where it joins the trunk. Here is a side shoot, so we could make the cut here, removing the vertical. Are there more opportunities up the branch? Nope, they're all vertical, no side shoots anymore. Well, let's see what Dr. Gilman says about where to make the structural pruning cuts. For his light pruning scenario, yeah, he makes two small cuts on A and one cut, there's only one cut available on B. And for his moderate pruning scenario, he makes the lower cut on A and removing the entire branch that's labeled B. So let's review. Structural pruning enables the central leader to stay dominant. It subordinates the side branches. And it also shortens branches that overreach. All of these together improve the aspect ratio where the branches connect and gives your tree a stronger structure to withstand wind, snow, ice. If your area gets windy, you want to pay special attention to trunk taper, which reverts to a trunk that is wider on the bottom and narrower on the top. A tree needs the low branches to develop taper. If you remove the low branches from a young tree, you take away its ability to gain taper. So keep them as long as you can. Mass damping also helps trees in wind. Mass damping is used in high-rise buildings to reduce movement. The same principle works in trees if we keep leaves throughout the tree. So compare these two maples, exact same species. The right one has leaves only in the top layer, and the left one has leaves throughout the plant. Which do you think will do better in windy conditions? You will be right. The left one will do better. So structural pruning should begin when the tree is young and continue through its life. Research showed pruning cuts cause internal injuries, and the extent of the injury is generally proportional to the size of the wound. So inspect your tree for structure every year. Look at the branch connections as we've discussed, and if you find a weak connection, fix it, because a small cut does far less damage than a large cut. Before I show you how to prune structurally, I want to review a few things. Apical dominance is the principle behind how plants respond to pruning. At the tip of a shoot is auxin. This is the growth hormone that inhibits new growth below. When we cut off the tip, we remove auxin and buds below are free to grow. Auxin moves by gravity. Its impact is strongest in a vertical branch, moderate at an angle, and hardly there in a horizontal branch. There are three common pruning cuts. We're going to look at two, heading and thinning here. The heading cut takes off a portion of a branch, and when those cuts remove the auxin, the rest of the plant responds with vigorous growth and makes it bushy. A thinning cut removes the branch at its point of origin to give us a more open plant. And the third cut, reduction cut, is used in structural pruning. On the surface, it looks like a thinning cut, which is also called a removal cut. Both of these cuts take place where two branches come together. Now let's take a look at the right illustration. The reduction cut is made where the upright one or the more vigorous one is removed. Ideally, the remaining branch is at least 1/3 the size of the branch removed. But in a thinning cut, we remove the smaller branch, and another major difference is the thinning cut is cut to the collar, which has chemicals and hormones to protect the wound from infecting. If you're not familiar with collar, uh, watch my videos for a discussion about them. And the reduction cut does not benefit from a collar. So it's not something to take lightly. And if you're going to make large reduction cuts, it would be a good idea to consult a certified arborist. Okay, let's look at how we make reduction cuts. In this example, we have a central leader that is crowded by two side branches. If we don't intervene, these side branches will gain vigor, which will worsen the aspect ratio where it joins the trunk. And over time, we'll get weaker connections. Where do we cut? Let's review where reduction cuts are made. Where the branches come together, we remove the vertical, more vigorous one. So looking at the branch on the left, we could potentially make a cut here, or we could go down further and make a cut here. And the most drastic would be removing the entire branch. So in making reduction cut, one option is to make smaller corrective cuts first. Watch how the plant responds and make more cuts if it's needed. The trade-off, of course, is we have to commit to checking how the tree responds and identify further problems annually in order to make corrections when it's needed. So again, reduction cut, we remove the vertical piece and keep the smaller branch and redirect growth there. Quick review of the 3 pruning cuts. Heading cuts makes a plant get bushier. Thinning or removal cut opens up the plant. And reduction cut slows the branch growth. Okay, here's a pop quiz. What would you do? Take a close look at this tree. Remember the 3 questions. Where's the leader? Where are the competition? And where do you make the cut to suppress the competition? Okay, well, I would say this is the leader. I can see this is a competition. And you can see aspect ratio is not good. It's kind of large. The angle of attachment is not good. It's pretty narrow. So moving up this branch, here's an opportunity. There's a side shoot. So you could make a cut here. Moving further up the branch, there's another side shoot going away from us and you can make the cut here. So and there may be further opportunities up higher in the tree. Well, I hope this gives you a pretty good idea of how structural pruning can make a difference in improving tree structure. And if you watch the video that's listed on the top of the resource sheet, it's a 1-hour program that summarizes these ideas and go into detail on many other concepts to support doing structural pruning. If you are interested in exploring more, there are more resources on this sheet, and they're all good, and I recommend them all. Now, let's move on to fruit trees. My focus here would be on the tree's form for easy access and how to manage fruiting wood. Fruit trees naturally want to grow a certain shape. For example, apples like to grow as a central leader. Peaches like to grow as an open center. But all fruit trees can be trained into an open center form because it's what I prefer for the home orchard because it's easier to manage, it's safer to reach all parts. The open center tree grows lower and wider, and it gets sunlight through the center. The central leader trees grow taller, the light hits the outer layer. You can remove the top branch of or branches of a central leader to get a modified central leader. So in this tree, perhaps make a cut here, removing the top portion, stimulate more lower branches, and get a modified central leader. And this is how you train a bare root whip into an open center form. At planting, you make a heading cut. This is made usually at 18 inches to 30 inches above the graft union. Keep in mind, this heading cut stimulates growth underneath, and those branches will form the structure of your fruit tree. So the higher you make the cut, the higher the origination point for your fruiting structures will be, and the lower cut will give you a lower framework. The photo here, as an example, shows an apple tree that naturally wants to grow into a central leader, getting a heading cut when it was young. That's pretty low. I think maybe about 2 feet above ground or even less. And it developed a branching structure which formed an open center tree. Okay, so this heading cut at planting will stimulate growth of probably 3, 4, 5 shoots by the first summer. And by the first winter, we come back and take a look at the branches and make some minor adjustments. For example, taking out branches that are rubbing against each other, that are facing downward or toward the center, in order to have a better form. And you can continue this for the next few years in order to complete developing your structure. And what you want ideally are branches that are 360 degrees around the trunk and have good vertical distance in their point of attachment. I have a video on fruit tree pruning, which will provide more information about how to train a young fruit tree. Well, let's take a look at some examples of young fruit trees that are growing in the Portland metro area and see how might we open up the center of these trees. All right, the left one is a peach. It has a very strong central leader, has two strong side shoots. I like how low these side shoots are. And the leader has more side shoots as we move up, kind of the area around this blue tag, and then there are more branches in the back that are not really clear in the photo. So what if you want to open up this tree in order to lower the fruiting branches and make them a little more accessible? I would suggest cutting the central branch to a strong side shoot, maybe somewhere around here. And then in addition, I would suggest shortening these side branches, which will stimulate branching lower. And that's going to potentially give us a framework that's easier to reach and also open up the center. Okay, this middle one is an apple tree which has had deer damage that took out the lower branches, and we have 4 to work with. And when I look at these 4, I can see one that has a fair amount of damage here. So to open up the center, I would take out the damaged one. And for the 3 remaining branches, I would head them back, meaning cut them shorter. And that should stimulate lower branches, and one or more of those new branches will potentially be the candidate to fill in the space that's left open by removing this shoot. And it also gives material for me to perhaps train the fruiting branches and develop a good scaffold structure for 360-degree coverage. The final example is a 4-way cherry tree, strong trunk, 4 varieties of cherries that are grafted onto the trunk. And okay, I see a few things. I see a very strong looking branch that came from the rootstock. You can see here's the graft union, and this shoot came from below the graft union. So we don't want that. So that should be cut off as low as possible. And then the remaining grafted branches, I would prune them in a way to reduce or remove the branches that are grown toward the center, which will then help open up the center while I can still have each graft grow strong and produce the fruit that I want. Well, reduction cuts are useful in certain situations with fruit tree. For example, renovating a neglected oak tree or converting a central leader into a modified central leader, and just in height reduction. I've talked earlier about how reduction cuts are not protected by a collar. So it is something that carries a greater risk than cutting to a collar. in terms of rot. So that's something that we want to do with care. And if we make these cuts, which tend to be severe in the summer, we may weaken the tree and we also may see sun scald. And if we do this in the winter, we can expect vigorous water sprouts in response. Um, when you make severe cuts, be very mindful to keep the pruning, the total amount of pruning, to 1/3 to a quarter, which is what we recommend as the annual budget. In order to be successful with pruning fruit trees, we have to know what fruiting would look like. So let's begin with the location of fruiting buds. They can be on shoots and spurs. There are long shoots and then there are spurs. And they can also be distributed at the tip of the shoots and spurs that we call terminal, or they can be along the shoots and spurs that we call lateral. This publication has a very good table that show you the common fruit trees, location of their buds, and gives you some pruning tips. But let's begin by looking at spurs and shoots. All right, this is an apple branch. You can see long shoots, short shoots, and spurs. And up close, you can see apple spurs. See how squished looking they are and how tightly closed the annual growth are, and plum spur. Now that we know what fruiting wood in spurs look like, let's take a look at how we age wood. So 1 year old, that's last year's growth. 2 year old, the previous year, 3 and 4 year old. And I want to point out something called bud scale scar. Bud scales are like little blankets that are wrapped around your terminal bud to protect it in the cold. When growth begins, the scales fall off and leaving these scars. And that's a very useful telltale in aging the wood. So I want you to take a close look at this branch here and tell me which side, the left or right, has younger wood. And I'll give you a clue. New wood is richer in color, thinner skinned, and old wood has duller color and thicker skin. If you said left, you will be correct. The left side is younger. Let's take a look at how we manage spurs for fruit production. If your kind of tree has spurs, you want to take good care of them because spurs are awesome. They take very little work and they produce a lot and they can live a long time. So tips for managing fruiting spurs. You want to reduce overhead shade in order to give them plenty of sunlight. And if some of the old spurs are not productive, you can try to head back a little bit and see if that would rejuvenate them. You can also make new spurs, well, not. You can encourage new spurs to grow with two things. The first one is you can head back shoots. And the second thing is you can bend shoots that are vertical to more of a horizontal position, and that removes the apical dominance and will encourage new spur development. With the fruit trees, we also have to manage shoots. And there are two kinds of shoots, water sprouts and the regular shoots. Water sprouts are vertical, vigorous shoots, and you have three options. You can cut it clean, remove it completely, or you can cut it to one bud, and that sometimes will coax the remaining portion to develop spur, or you can bend it down to redirect growth and encourage more fruit. The other shoots, you have some options also. And it depends on the vigor of the shoot. And we assess the vigor based on how much they grew last year. So if they grew a lot, the last year's growth is long, that's a vigorous shoot. In apples, 10 inches or more, that's considered vigorous. You want to cut it to a few buds. And if it's moderate, less than 10 inches from last year's growth, and it's grown at an angle, you can leave them as they are. Keep in mind the amount of pruning for mature fruit trees. On average, peach and nectarine need heavier pruning. You remove about 50% of last year's growth. And for the other trees, you remove roughly 20%. Often people will say, well, what happens if I over prune? Well, if you remove too much in the winter, you may stimulate actually an over exuberant growth response from the tree and end up with a lot more to deal with next year. So you may want to come back and do some cleanup of those new shoots. And if you remove them in the summer, you're not going to stimulate the same response, and you can save yourself a little work next winter. So the timing of pruning, any time is good for those portions that are dead, disease damaged. In the winter, we prune during the dormant season. It's easier because we can see the structure of the tree, but it does stimulate growth in the spring. And you do want to keep in mind the potential pathogen activities that are prevalent in your region. I know in our area, the winter is wet. And so for some trees that are more easy to get sick, we recommend not pruning them until the summer. And if you prune in the summer, you want to do it after solstice, and that will reduce the vigorous response of the tree to pruning. But you may experience sun scald. And for cherry, plum, apricot, peach, in areas with wet winter, we recommend pruning in the summer immediately after harvest. These are the resources that I recommend, beginning with the 1-hour video I did. And the second resource is the University of California handout, which has one giant table listing the common fruit trees, where the fruits are, spurs where shoots, how the longevity of the spurs, and the pruning budget. And I think it's really handy, and I just carry it into the garden before I prune. It's a useful reminder. And then the next three references are all very good and have very helpful tips. And our final group are ornamental shrubs. And here I'm going to focus on knowing their natural shape, plus some solutions for common problems. Knowing how your shrub is supposed to grow should be the first step toward good pruning. I say this because many ornamental shrubs naturally look good. They really don't need much pruning at all. And in this slide, I show 3 examples with a weeping form of Japanese maple, a witch hazel, and a Paris, also called Andromeda. And up here, there are examples of more tree-like shrubs that just naturally look pretty good. Pruning these trees really should focus on the health, and that's removing the 4 Ds: dead, diseased, damaged, and dysfunctional wood. And what do I mean by dysfunctional wood? I'm talking about those branches that are grown toward the center, crossing or rubbing others, or the ones that are overly vigorous and creating undesirable or unpleasant form for the tree or the shrub. Some of the shrubs naturally form a mound. On the screen are 6 examples. In addition to these, there's some other examples. I'm sure you can think of some. I can think of some barberries or boxwood, burning bush, Ascalonia, some euonymus or snowberry, just among many of them. These should not be sheared because if you do that, you actually take away the natural growth pattern and create a thicket near the tip that is difficult to reverse. If you find errant branches that are poking above the frame, simply grab them and just cut to a side shoot a few inches below the surface. Now, after saying don't shear them, there are exceptions. For example, heath and heather, you may shear them after bloom. Or lavender, you may cut back the growth, the branches when the growth begins, but just take care in not cutting into old wood. Some shrubs don't like pruning very well, and it's difficult to prune them without destroying their natural form. And these are some examples here: Cistus, Hylimnium, Ceanothus, and Arctostaphylos. Um, really the best way to make sure these shrubs stay in good form is put them in a location where they have plenty of room to grow. So we were talking about pruning for health, and to focus on health, it begins with taking out dead, disease, and damaged branches first. And I want to share an experience. I once pruned a weeping shrub willow. The weeping branches casted very deep shade in the center, and it resulted in lots of dead wood. And I don't think that shrub had been pruned for, I don't know, 5, 6 years. So I crawled under the canopy, checked each branch, and took out all the dead ones. It was tedious. There seemed to be hundreds of them. When it was done, I was amazed by the transformation. Out of the congested mess emerged a very elegant form. The moral of the story: sometimes removing dead wood alone will do the trick. Well, how can you tell dead wood from healthy ones? Well, these are the dead wood attributes. The branch is brittle, cambium layer. If you scrape the surface, you can see it's not green. The wood has a different color. Usually it's darker brown. You see only dead leaves or no leaves, and the buds look dead. I mean, for me, the quickest clue is just put something that's a little weight on it. If I put my pruner on the little branch, the dead ones will just snap off easily, while the live ones will bend. Well, this maple is very well pruned. And why do I say that? Because I can see when I took the photo, there was dapple sunlight underneath the canopy. If your shrub has a congested center, look at the ground where stems originate. Locate the oldest ones and cut at or just above the ground. Cut as low as you can. So you'll need a lopper or a small handsaw for the job. And you can continue with that, making the low cut, removing the largest, oldest branches. and remove up to a third of the canes. I would also take out the very low branches that are kind of grown toward the ground. And when you're doing this, step back periodically to look at the form and see if it's close to what you would like. And you can also work your way up, use only thinning cuts to take out some of the crossing branches and remove the long whips. Again, 1/3 of total foliage removal is your guide. If you want more flowers, heading cuts will help. And let's look at these. Let's look at roses as an example. Well, this is what we know about roses. Most bloom on new growth. So we want to prune them in late winter, early spring before growth begins. Some of them are once blooming, and they should be pruned after bloom. And this is the steps for the non-climbing roses. Again, we start low, near the ground, at the ground level. You can remove up to 1/3 of the old canes from the base. And we can also remove the crossing and weak branches because they're not very productive. Most people think tea and shrub roses look best with 5 to 6 radiating canes. I've seen them with as few as 3 canes. It really depends on how much space you have. But with the canes you keep, you want to head them back to an outside bud. And with hybrid tea grandiflora canes, they can be shortened to 12 to 18 inches, and floribunda can be a little higher. So this seems arbitrary. And really, how high you keep these canes is a matter of, I think, how tall you want that rose to be during the growing season. For example, I have roses in the front of the border, and I reduce the canes to a much lower frame, so the flowers are at eye level. But my roses in the back of the border, I keep the canes taller. But for our climbing roses, we should keep the canes at a 45-degree or greater angle, and they really should be supported with a wall or a structure. And by bending the cane, we stimulate shoot development, and then we should head back these shoots, and that will encourage more branching and more flowers. How about hydrangeas? Those that bloom on old wood, and by that I mean anything that is older than this year's growth, should be pruned after flowering. And we only prune the stems that have flower. And this would apply to oak leaf hydrangea and the ones with flowers like these, the mophead and the lace cap. But there are 2 types of hydrangeas that should be pruned differently, and they are the arborescens with kind of white ball-shaped flowers and paniculatas that have panicle-shaped flowers. These bloom on current season shoots, so they should be pruned in late winter, early spring as growth begins. And the paniculatas, I think it's a good idea to develop a framework to support and lift the flowers. This is the framework I developed for my paniculata. Oh, and I have pruning videos for hydrangea and roses that you might want to take a look for more examples. Okay, we're going to wrap up with an overgrown lilac at the Fort Vancouver Garden as an example to talk about radical renovation. What if you have an old shrub that is so overgrown and difficult to manage, and the flowers are out of reach? So shrub is difficult to manage, flowers are too high for enjoyment, and we know the best blooms grow on pencil-sized stems, and old canes are less productive. So if we want this lilac for flowers and enhance the enjoyment of them, we could consider radical renovation. And this is how it looks like. You have the framework of the lilac. You cut it severely to a foot to 18 inches above ground. You can cut it to an even, the same level, or you can cut it to an uneven framework, meaning some are cut higher and some are cut lower. And my friend Rob Rosser did this with the lilac at the Fort Vancouver Historical Garden, and they look great. That's where I took the photos. So let me explain the rules for radical renovation. There are some conditions we need to satisfy. Do it only with healthy, well-established plants. They should be in locations where there's plenty of sunlight to support and stimulate the regrowth. You want to make the cut just before growth begins, usually late winter, early spring. And you have to keep up the watering during the first year and don't fertilize it. The potential pitfalls, you'll lose flowers for one or more seasons. The plant may die from stress because this is a big shock to the system. The new shoots tend to be weak and floppy, so kind of be prepared for that, but they'll grow out of it. And it generally works better for plants that, shrubs that grow in the cane type, like Oregon grape, for example, or lilacs. And it's less reliable with the mounding types of shrubs. So with that, more resources, and we're done. I'm ready for some questions.
Hi, Sherry. That was great. I can tell you, we really didn't have very many questions because I think everyone was so in tune to what you were talking about. And I was just memorized, however you say that?
Mesmerized?
Mesmerized. I hope I memorized some of it too. I did want to say one thing. If people, since you did talk about certain shrubs, a few shrubs, but if you have another shrub that you are having difficulty with and you have a question, just send a detailed description and a photo to the 10-Minute University link that you'll find on your Zoom confirmation. You can always send it and someone will answer your question for you. I just have a couple questions. And one is,
Just on that point, Jane, I want to interrupt. I I really love getting questions, especially questions that clearly describe what's the problem and with clear photos. I'll tell you a few things. Number one, it keeps me, it gives me an opportunity to practice. It keeps my mind sharp. If I don't know the answer, I can look it up. And so I learn more. And it gives me photos for future pruning classes. So please send me photos and questions. And I just love answering those questions. So please do it,
great.
folks.
Well, I'm sure you'll get some of them. There were just a couple questions. You did talk about, remember the slide that you showed a young plant, a young tree, what you would cut at planting and then the next year and the next year. Well, this person asked that very young trees, she read that they should not be pruned because the lateral branches add strength to the trunk. And is there a certain size or a certain age that you do start pruning those young trees that you've just planted?
I'm glad with this question because the information I share with the illustrations is about fruit trees. And in fruit trees, we want to make a very low heading cut at planting to stimulate the rest of the fruiting scaffold or branches to grow low. And that will keep the fruit tree easily reachable in the home orchard. That's
Okay.
different if we're talking about an ornamental tree or an ornamental shrub. We would not recommend that low cut and developing an open framework. It's only specific to the fruit
Yes.
trees.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And you're talking about like at planting time, even at planting time.
Yes, I'm talking about at planting time. And if your tree is, let's say you have not a little whip, which is the example I showed, so it hardly has any branches, it's just like a stick with, maybe a few branches, that's best for that method. If you have a fruit tree that's planted in a container already, it already started developing branches, um, then it's different. You can make a lower cut to stimulate more lower branch growth, but it may not be as severe as the 18-inch or 2-foot height cut.
Okay. Okay. And one thing people might be confused about because, the ideas change from year to year. And I know they used to tell you to cut them at planting time. And then for a while they were saying, don't prune your trees at planting time. And then they've changed it back to, yes, it's a good idea. So
Oh,
sometimes there's old
yeah,
information.
I think this is helping me remember one of the wrong ideas from the old days about pruning is, oh, when you plant a tree because the root of the tree had been damaged when when the tree was taken from the field and put in your garden, there had been roots cut. So some people say, oh, you should remove the top that will balance with the damage to the root. So everything is in proportion. That's proven to be a wrong idea. But the low cut that I mentioned is specific to fruit trees, not
Right.
to ornamental trees or shrubs.
Right. Okay. Um, And I just also wanted to mention, and you can re-mention it, someone asked about the multi-fruited apple trees. What would you do about that? And Patty did a good job of answering this question specifically to this person. But last week, when you did the fruit tree pruning video, you really talked a lot about what to do if you have a different varieties on a trunk. So I was just wanted to mention if anybody has that concern to look at last week's January 8th video because it talks a lot about that.
Yeah,
Um,
I think a quick review is if you have multi-grafted tree, be prepared. The various graft will have different built-in vigor because their genetics are different. So
yes.
some will be more vigorous and others will be weaker. And your more vigorous grafts will need to be managed by using more thinning cuts and maybe pruned in the summer because that reduce vigor.
Oh, right.
But your weaker grafts should be pruned with more heading cuts to stimulate growth and encourage vigor. Because after a while, if you don't make an effort to balance the growth, you're going to get a lopsided tree with one side being much bigger than the other side. And it'll be tough to, continue to keep all of the grafts still viable.
Okay, great. And then actually the last question, you talked a lot about how to open up different trees. So this person said basically, is it that we want more light on the inside of the tree and less light on the side branches? And is the 1/3 cut, only take a 1/3? Is that a strict rule?
Well, the 1/3 rule is, I wouldn't say it's strict, but it's a useful guideline. And if you have a really vigorous tree, you can probably take the pruning budget without any problem. But if your tree is not vigorous, not well established, has a limited root system, then you want to be more careful in removing too much. Um,
And
back
the light,
to
you want more
back
light
to
on
the
the inside
light.
of the tree. Huh.
The open center facilitates light reaching a bigger part of the canopy, and the central leader only gets sunlight on the exterior. So when you see your central leader tree grow over time, the fruiting branches will keep getting farther and farther and farther away from the center, and you have to climb higher and higher and higher to get the fruit. In your open center tree, your fruiting wood will also grow farther from the center, but they're going kind of sideways at an angle. And so in my fruit tree pruning video, I show how you can shorten the branch. So you have that option, and chances are it's a branch that you can reach easily, with a saw or a lopper. You don't have to climb on a ladder. And that's why I encourage people to think about how to open up the center, because some people have done the calculation and say an open center form actually gets more sunlight than a central leader. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's, you know,
Oh, it kind of does make sense.
yeah.
Okay, that's all the questions I had for you, Sherry. Thank you.